Wendy, welcome to the pod.
I'm very happy to share my story, how I developed a multi-million-pound property portfolio. Since then, I've become more involved in politics.
Are you excited and optimistic about the future of Great Britain right now?
That's a really good question. The British spirit is incredible, but it is being quashed by what's happening right now. Capitalism may not be a perfect solution, but it's the least worst solution that we have.
What would you say the solution is to helping the poor in a capitalist society?
Education as emancipation, education as freedom. This is the ticket. We have not had any government who has really supported the small business or entrepreneur sector. Taxation of any market eventually leads to a complete lack of choice. And if we want to be a country where we have no choice, you're going to be very happy in the UK. We're nearly at £3 trillion worth of national debt, and this is not reducing. And yet this government claims to be a government. Sorry, I'm getting on my political high horse now.
So you belong to the Reform Party.
Yes.
Are you racist? Is your property journey? Can you take me just through that quickly?
He was frustrated because the valuation office agency had banded each of the rooms in his HMO individually for council tax. The government decided that they would make this unlawful. That put the fire in my belly. I realised I could do some more campaigning.
So you had young kids at the time of your building phase.
Yeah.
How did you find that? And what was the hardest thing?
Well,
but I think just in line, kind of taking a little bit of a side road here, and we'll come back to it because I want to talk into freedom of speech and a few different other political issues.
Yeah.
Is your property journey? Can you take me just through that quickly, but also how that's helped you in being an independent thinker, someone who can question and get involved politically, financial freedom to you, what is it to you, and how did you get there?
That's a great question. Well, I first bought a property to rent out in 1997. I was only about 5 at the time.
Yeah.
I was left a small pot of money, and it was actually my mum who said to me, Wendy, you should invest in property. She had obviously seen how property had grown in value. My mum and dad didn't invest in property themselves, but they obviously had our family home, and they were very frugal people. And I think over the number of years that they had owned property, my mum had seen how prices had gone up. They'd seen how the rental market had expanded, and I was at the stage where I had 2 children. I had 2 young boys. And I think my mum felt that if I invested in property, first of all, I wouldn't just fritter it away on a nice holiday and, a new car and so on, but also I'd be providing something of a legacy to the boys. And so I started to read various different magazines and books about it. And I thought, this sounds like a good idea. So my first husband, who I was with at the time, and I decided that we would invest in this property. And it turned out to be a student shared house. Now, at that stage, the word HMO, or the phrase HMO, hadn't really been coined by the government. So we bought this property and rented it out, and probably, in today's standard, did a terrible job. Absolutely terrible. I basically let the students live there. I would go once a term to pick up their rent in cash. I'd give them a little note to say they'd paid the rent, and then I just let them get on with it. That's all I did.
Yeah.
And then in the summer, they'd phone me up and say, Wendy, we're moving out. You might want to have a bit of a clean up. I'd go in and see. It was an absolute state. I would do a thorough deep clean. They'd all come back in September, and the whole merry-go-round would start again. And that was great. And I still got that property today.
Which area is that?
This is in South Cheshire, where I live.
Okay.
So it's literally in the town that I live in. Now, unfortunately, the college that had provided me with all these lovely students closed down. So I then had to turn that property into a single buy-to-let. So now actually a family lives there, and they've been living there for about 7 years. So since then it became a family buy-to-let. But after a few years, I began to get quite interested in auction property. And I thought, right, this could be a route of buying properties cheaply, adding value, refinancing, taking the money out, and then going again. So I refinanced that property, which had gone up a bit in value, took some money out and bought 2 auction properties, which we then did up. One of them we sold, one of them we rented out, and then I did it again. By the time it came to about, let's say, 2012, I had about 5 or 6 single buy-to-lets. They were plodding along, it wasn't anything particularly exciting. Yeah, probably I had a few more than the average landlord has today, but it was a very small portfolio. I had been working full-time. I had by then got 2 more boys, so I now had a complement of 4. And I was in a second
4
marriage.
boys?
I have 4 boys, yes.
No girls?
No girls.
Wow, okay.
4
I got
boys.
3 girls. So.
Okay, fine. Yeah, I've got 4 boys. In fact, my youngest is going to be 18 tomorrow. So, yes, freedom.
Wow, that is true freedom.
Yeah, exactly.
Forget financial freedom.
Yes, correct. And we paid his last school fee as well. Oh, that was a big relief because he's in a private school. So we've seen the impact on the VAT on that situation. So I came to this point where I had been working for Sure Start in the early 2000s. Then I moved on to university. I became a lecturer. I did a master's degree in early years. But I was feeling discontent. And being a Christian, I always asked God, what's my next step, Lord? Where do you want me to go? What's the next thing I should do? And I'd always had a bit of a burning desire to be an entrepreneur, albeit maybe perhaps I had bigger visions of I was going to be the next Anita Roddick from The Body Shop, which you might not even remember her. Have you heard of her? I was a big Laura Ashley fan. I read her biography. I thought she was an amazing woman. Sadly, she died, Laura Ashley. But these female entrepreneurs I read about, I learned about, I watched and sort of listened to where I could. And I thought, I could be the next one of them. But I ended up doing more property, and it got to about 2013, and I looked at my portfolio and I began to see the rise of the HMO. And of course, in the 2004 Housing Act, we suddenly had this idea of a house of multiple occupation. And I began to rethink this strategy and think, maybe this is something I could revisit. So my husband and I bought a small 2-bed terraced house, and we turned it into a 4-bed HMO in Crewe in Cheshire. And within a week, all the rooms had been rented out. And I thought, this is amazing. And if I'd rented that property as a single family home, I probably would have made £400 profit a month. Let's say I'd rented it for $650 or something. I had a small mortgage on it. So not too bad. But as an HMO, I was making about £800 a month profit on that property. So double. And I just began to see pound signs in my eyes. I thought, this is the way to go. So I then immediately bought a 7-bed. Well, in fact, it was a 3-bed terraced house, big Victorian house with a big extension on the back, and we turned it into a 7-bed HMO. In that process, I made many, many mistakes. I didn't know about building regulations. I didn't know about planning permission. So I was constantly getting myself in hot water with the council and with the builder.
But the council are reasonable, aren't they?
Well, they can be. Some councils can be. Some can be less reasonable.
That's a joke for anyone that's not in property.
Yeah, quite. Exactly. I don't know what Milton Keynes is like, but Cheshire East are. Yes,
they actually are, to be fair, at Milton Keynes Council, they are actually really, it depends which department. I won't say which ones.
Exactly.
But
some are better than
for fear
others.
of things. But the people that I deal with are very good people mostly.
Good. So I found myself learning on the job. And I learned absolutely loads about how to set up an HMO. In a way, it was good that I'd gone big on this one because I would never have learned what really stood me in very, very good stead later on.
So did you just go gung-ho? Did you?
Yeah, absolutely.
You didn't go to some training course?
No.
Or you just went boom?
No.
Okay.
I watched a couple of webinars. I read a couple of books. I thought, I've done this before. But that was very different. In 1997 to 2012... 13, the world had changed. It was a very, very different world.
I feel like I've missed out. As a young guy, I was like, everyone talks, because I was still in school. I matriculated, so 2009 I finished school. And when I hear people talking about what it was like investing here before, it sounded so easy.
Oh, totally
it sounded like you could just get rid of it. It was just like the Wild West.
Yeah.
But
I wouldn't say it was like the Wild West. Okay, I mean, there was a company called Mortgage Express.
Mm-hmm.
If you know, you know. Mm-hmm. Anyone who's heard of Mortgage Express, You're with me. And we had a few Mortgage Express mortgages, and Mortgage Express were just, they would just sort of kind of say, what do you want? And you say, well, this house is worth £100,000. Can we have a 100% mortgage? They go, yeah, that's fine. Yeah. What's your bank account detail? Yeah. It really was almost as simple as that. You just sent them a few forms. You just ticked a few boxes. They'd phone you up. They'd probably do a valuation of the property. They'd value it at what you more or less said it was valued at, and they would give you the money, and it was 100%. So it was so easy. Yes, and then of course after the crash, 2008 crash, we then had different banking regulations that were brought in. So you had to put in a 25% loan to value deposit. You couldn't do refinance on the same day. You couldn't do lease to what's it called?
Lease to buy.
Yeah. Rent. Oh, there was a phrase for it. I can't remember what it was now, but where somebody would be a distressed seller. They were living in a home. Sale to rent back. Sale. That's right. Sale to rent back. Something like that. Which I felt was so short-sighted because there are so many people who wanted to stay in their home, but they couldn't afford it. So effectively what happened was after the new regulations came in, you couldn't then buy that house and keep those people in the property. They had to move out. And where would they go? Social housing. So now the council's having to house them. Ridiculous. So these kind of things, they all have trade-offs. They all have other implications. And we've got to think very, very careful. What are those trade-offs we're making? So anyway, then I ran out of money. It happens to everybody. Don't worry if it's happened to you. It should. You know you're learning if you run out of money. I had a reasonable portfolio, but I still wanted to grow. And I ended up going to a weekend course. I didn't sign up for the mentoring for the rest of the year, but that weekend course was really good because I met an investor. And the investor said to me, why don't we form a joint venture? And I'll put the money in, you do the work, and we'll go 50-50 on the profit. And I thought, that sounds like a good deal to me. So we started to work together. We formed our own company called Best Nest Properties, and we developed a portfolio together. And then at a certain point in time, the investor decided that there were other things he wanted to do. That was fine. We kept the properties, managed them. And then I did that same model with a couple of other investors as well. So I used their money to build my portfolio. And then I got to the point where I had about 50 rooms and I was managing the rooms rather than having time to develop the portfolio.
On your own at this point?
Yes, on my own.
That's a lot.
Actually, it wasn't too bad because we would tend to take on a 6-bed HMO. We generally did 6. We did a few 5-beds as well. And I would fill them and then we'd be on to the next one. And a lot of those early tenants didn't move out for quite a while. They were, fairly kind of stayed and I mean, what I mean is they stayed. They weren't stayed, although they might have been stayed, but they stayed in the property. Yeah. And so there wasn't a lot of churn, which was really good because we did high quality properties with en suites and the rents were very good. They were higher than market rents, but that's because our properties were good quality. So that it wasn't too difficult, but I could just see that this was taking more time than I wanted. And of course, my boys needed me. My older boys were kind of growing up. They were doing A levels, and they needed it. Although it's different, really. As your children get older, they need you less in some ways, but they need you more in others. And I had a little one. Tom was born in 2008, so he was maybe 6 or 7 years old. So I was beginning to feel I'm going to have to bring somebody in. So I hired somebody to help me. And that became the foundation for our lettings business. So within 2 or 3 years, we decided actually, by then we had about 120 rooms. So what we should do is set up a lettings agency. They can then manage all of the rooms and all the properties. And actually, as it is, we've now grown. We've now got nearly 250 units. So we have now a mixture of commercial, HMOs, buy-to-lets, and my letting agency manages it for us, which is brilliant. I still get involved a little bit because obviously on your personal properties you have to be involved, and we've done a couple of refurbs and things like that. But generally the day-to-day stuff now is taken out of my hands, which is really good. So yeah, we spent a lot of time systemizing and growing the business. And then since really I had that steady income, obviously I gave up my job. Andy, my husband, he gave up his job. We then started to do commercial conversions. We bought blocks of flats. We've bought garages. We bought all sorts of different bits and pieces, and now got a portfolio that supports us and is income producing, obviously. But yeah, we still say, oh, I wish we had more cash, because cash flow is king, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Now, though I haven't really answered your question, Dylan, because I think you were really asking not just about the property journey, but how it's translated into who I am and what I'm doing now. So a few years ago, I came across this guy called Darren. And he had an HMO on the south. They have a few HMOs actually in Portsmouth. And he was frustrated because the valuation office agency that decides how much council tax you'll pay had banded each of the rooms in his HMO individually for council tax. And we got together through a mutual friend on Facebook. And he said, I'm working with a barrister called Alan Murdy. And we want to fight this because we think it's really unfair. Now, this hadn't happened to me, but it had happened to a couple of mentoring clients of mine, where they had the VOA come in at the end of the development and say, right, this is an HMO. These are all self-contained rooms. We're going to levy an individual council tax against each of these rooms. And I ended up getting involved in the dispute and the legal challenge and the appeal, and winning, actually, which was great. But Darren had not been so successful. And so we together set up the HMO Council Tax Reform Group and fought for, I suppose it was about 2.5 years, to get this changed. And in December 2023, well, actually it was October 2023, we found out that the government had decided to, via something called a statutory instrument, which is a change to the law, the government decided that they would make this unlawful. So the VOA could no longer band individual rooms in an HMO separate for council tax. And I think that put the fire in my belly.
Yeah.
I realised I could do some more of this. I could do some more campaigning. I could do some more standing up for landlords and the private rental sector and changing things.
Something actually changed. And that was a big thing, because a few friends, one of my mentors, he went through that, and I think his was like an 11 bed and a 10 bed next to each other, both got whacked. And you think about, for people that don't understand that, like, that could be, instead of a council tax bill of 180, it could be £1,500 per month.
Yes.
And it's all the profit margin wiped out immediately. But then, like you said before, the certainty for other HMO investors was gone, because you're like, are we going to get hit? And there was, again, that was the Wild West, because there was no common sense to the way it was done. So the fact you guys actually won that and brought that change is a benefit to all of us. So
absolutely.
Thank you.
And tenants, because you see, the problem was that when you start to levy council tax on an individual unit like that, it becomes the responsibility of the tenant, not the landlord. So a lot of landlords knew this, and they said, well, I'm not paying. It's your responsibility. So now the tenants are landed with the bill, and the tenants are saying, hold on a minute, I thought this was all-inclusive rent. I signed up to an all-inclusive deal here. Why are you now charging me for council tax? So it really kind of pitted landlords against tenants. And we heard some awful stories, really heart-wrenching stories. I know of one landlord who tried to commit suicide over this. And in fact, I think there were stories of other landlords who actually did commit suicide, which is devastating for their families and their friends, over council tax. And this to me is, I just couldn't believe the injustice of it. It still makes me so angry and upset to this day to think that happened. And of course, unfortunately, we still see a lot of this. There are stories like this all the time from the British public, widening this out. For example, think about the post office scandal, what happened there. Absolutely devastating injustice. You can't believe it would happen in the UK. And so I think from that time, I began to think maybe I should widen my net. Maybe I should start to get a bit more involved in politics. Perhaps I should start to do more to represent the private rental sector, politically and stand up for them, stand up for HMO owners, because there's a lot of negativity written in the press about HMOs, a misunderstanding about HMOs. And actually, I believe I have been able to influence certain things. For example, the antisocial behaviour element of the Renters' Rights Act. The HMO Council Tax Reform Group changed its name to the HMO Action Group, which is what we're called now. And we wrote to the government about the antisocial behaviour elements in Ground 8, in Section 8, sorry. And they listened to us. And so now there's 2 clauses to get rid of a tenant on under a Ground 8 for antisocial behaviour. And one of the reasons why the, I think it's Ground 7 was introduced was because of our lobbying of the government. And you can look at Hansard and you can see we are quoted there. So that was really good as well. And, but yeah, I think since then I felt that, let's take the Reform Party. We've heard a lot of their MPs and their candidates talk about HMOs negatively. So I wrote a paper about HMOs. And interestingly, I know that I gave it to Matt Goodwin and he read it and he's incorporated it into his book. I gave it to Sarah Pochin. She's read it and we've had a very good discussion about it. I think there is a bit of a growing awareness that actually HMOs are not just grungy, horrible student HMOs like the one I originally owned, which was definitely like that. Badly run, probably health and safety all over the place. It was dreadful. I mean, how they survived, but probably that's how all student accommodation was like. So, there was that. But nowadays, of course, as we know, HMOs can be fantastic places to live. Beautiful.
Yeah.
They've got en suites, maybe little kitchenettes. They've got lovely double beds. They've got thick mattresses. I'd like to live in one of those HMO rooms. Beautiful kitchen, really good facilities, lots of amenities, and you pay one rent and it covers everything. I mean, for a young person who's just left university or looking for a job in a new town, why would you rent a flat when everything's all inclusive? And also, you've got the benefit of living with other people. So you're not going to be lonely. If you want to know where the local doctor's surgery is or where the best place to buy, I don't know, a bottle of wine or whatever it is, you can ask somebody in the house and you've maybe got some social contact as well. HMOs are a very important, powerful and good force in society. I fully believe in them. I despair when people simply think they're a form of bad housing. What we have got to do, though, I believe, is introduce a new use class. Because whether it's a hotel, which is C1, I think, or it is a C4 HMO, particularly C4 HMOs, if it's not in an Article 4 area, it doesn't need planning permission. But even then, you're not identifying what kind of tenant is moving into that property. So I believe that if we want to try and have local people voice an objection about an HMO holding immigrants, whether they be illegal or legal, and of course many of them have been made legal because they've got refugee status, but they're still on universal credit. But those HMOs should have their own planning class, because that's going to be the only method that we can allow for local people to say, excuse me, I don't want a C, let's make up a new class, C10 HMO in this street, and these are my reasons why. And that's the biggest objection I think that people have. It's not necessarily against those individuals, maybe in some cases it is. It's about not being able to object. The planning system is there to allow you to say, hang on a minute, I object. I don't think this housing estate should take place here because of these reasons. I don't believe there should be an extension to the licensing laws of that pub for these reasons. It's to enable local democracy, the local voice for people to object. And the problem, I think, with what's happened with companies, first of all, I don't think they particularly look after those HMOs terribly well. They probably don't look after the tenants very well. But equally, they have literally just plonked those tenants in onto a residential street. And I'm afraid to say that in many cases, those tenants do not share the same values and culture of their neighbours. And those neighbours feel uncomfortable about those people living there, but they haven't had any way in which they can say no. Now, of course, their no might not be heard, and it may be overturned, and it might go ahead anyway. But I think the point about planning is it allows us as a local resident to say the reasons why you wouldn't want something to happen, and then the planning committee at the council can weigh it up exactly and make a decision.
Back to choice, and I think I think there's so much in that could work, and I want to come back to, because there's if one or two things I want to jump back to is when you went on that journey. So you had your first two boys, first husband,
yes, that's
and
right.
then a second two. So you had young kids at the time of your building phase.
Yeah.
I want to ask, how did you find that, and what was the hardest thing? Did you have your hardest moment in your journey? You know, it could be from the property journey, but just in life in general. And how did you get through it?
Well, my first three boys I had with my first husband, and then Tom is my fourth boy with Andy. When my two eldest boys were about 7 and 5, my middle son Johnny developed a persistent cough, and he was at school, and he was in full-time school. And I remember the school nurse phoning me and saying, we're a bit concerned about Johnny because he's coughing all the time. And I knew he'd had this persistent cough, and I'd been to the doctors 2 or 3 times, and the doctors said, oh, it will pass, he'll be okay. And I think he'd had some antibiotics. Anyway, I remember going in for the 3rd time and seeing the GP and saying, something's not right. He's not growing, he's not putting on weight, he looks thin. I'm really worried about him. And the GP said, I think we need to get him tested for cystic fibrosis. Now, cystic fibrosis is a genetically inherited condition. If you'd seen the boys, you would not realise there was anything wrong with them, because it doesn't affect their brain, it doesn't affect their energy. They were still as energetic as ever. But it's a condition that affects your lungs and your internal organs. And it effectively stops the water being transferred between cells in the cell wall. So effectively, you build up this thick, sticky mucus in your lungs, and that traps bacteria. You then get infections, and then the lungs eventually fail. So it's a very serious condition. And because it's genetically inherited, you don't. Well, actually, at that time, there wasn't a birth test. Nowadays, I think all babies, when they have the heel prick test at birth, they also get tested for cystic fibrosis, a bit like sickle cell anemia and a couple of other conditions. So Johnny went to the hospital, and he had what's called a sweat test, where they put a little measure on his arm. They collect the sweat. They measure the sodium chloride ions that's collected in the sweat. And they came back and said, we think he's got cystic fibrosis, but we need to test your other children as well, because it's genetically inherited. They all might have it. So we had to go up to Liverpool Hospital, to Alderhay, and they did a more in-depth testing process called something called nasal potential difference, where they stick some probes up their nose, and it's more accurate. And it turned out that both Sam and Jonathan had cystic fibrosis. Now, obviously, that is a devastating diagnosis, because there's no cure. The average length of life is 40 years of age. It would mean they had to have antibiotics every day. They would have to have physiotherapy every day, twice a day, in fact. They would have to have regular intravenous antibiotics at the hospital. There's a huge amount of care that goes into looking after a person with CF. And I was obviously in shock at this. Luke, my 3rd boy, was clear. He hadn't inherited the gene. In fact, you need 2 genes. So he obviously had a different set of genes, that he'd inherited from me and my first husband. But he did not have cystic fibrosis, but the other 2 did. And so we just had to get on with it. So every morning and every evening, before and after school, the boys would have 20 minutes of physio that I would administer. They then had to have a nebulizer. They have to have oral antibiotics. The physio is to be able to release the mucus that's in the lungs, so they have to cough it up, so that the bacteria then wouldn't lodge in their lungs and cause infection. And then about every 12 weeks, Johnny would have to go into hospital for about 2 weeks to have intravenous antibiotics. So we would have to go in and obviously see him and take him in some schoolwork and support him and everything. Sam's condition wasn't quite as acute as Johnny's. I don't know why. It just didn't present in such a serious way. So he didn't have to go into hospital, but he had to still have all the preventative work at home. And it was very devastating and very difficult. And I think to a certain degree maybe added to the breakup of my first marriage because of the tension that it created. I think it added to that. And it was a really, really tough time. But, it's funny because I think sometimes in those really tough times, you also find your inner strength. You find something. And I had a lot of good friends one of whom was very wise. And she said to me, you are the best mother for these boys because they need someone who's going to fight for them. And you're that fighter. And internally I thought, but I don't want to be that person. I want my boys to be healthy and well and normal. And I don't want this. And she said, but it's too late. It's tough. They've got it. But you're the best woman for this job. So I had to just learn to cope with it and not think too much about the future, actually, not worry too much about their lifespan, not worry about all the risks with cystic fibrosis. And if you look up cystic fibrosis, you can see what the risks are. Google is a great thing, but it can be a terrible thing as well. You can kind of indulge in the worst case scenario. You can catastrophize. And there was an element in which probably I was at risk of catastrophizing. But I just thought you have to live every day as it comes. I mean, I'd had friends at school and at uni. A friend of mine at university had been murdered, believe it or not, on campus. And it was shocking. It sent the shockwave through the university campus when it happened. And at school, when I was in the sixth form, a pair of my friends were killed in a road traffic accident. And they were 18, and then my friend Catherine at uni, she was probably about 20. So I knew that life was temporary. I knew life would end. And we never know when. It could end today for me. I mean, I hope it doesn't.
Yeah. With my driving, hopefully not.
Exactly. But we just never know. And I think that sense of mortality has always been very real to me. And again, I think maybe because of my faith, believing that we will live on after we die. I believe in, resurrection. I believe in the resurrection life. I believe in immortality when you have faith in Christ. So for me, I always believed that I would live even if I died, and I believe the boys would live even if they died. So for me, their spirit would live on even if their bodies had died. So I think my faith very much cosseted me and comforted me. But actually, I think I did also have to find that inner strength and know that as a mum, I had to just be there for my boys. And I had to be able to communicate that just do today. We're not going to think about next week or next month or next year. Let's just get through today. And even if we had a tough day, even if Johnny didn't feel very well or was feeling sick, because he often felt sick because of his lungs, trying to eat a little bit more of this or try and have a little bit more of that, or let's do something else here or let's do something else there. But you see, what's been amazing about the whole journey with CF is you just never know what tomorrow's going to bring. And it isn't always terrible, because at the same time, the Cystic Fibrosis Trust started to develop very well. They weren't developing the drugs. It was pharmaceutical companies that were developing drugs. And they developed something that was a very special drug. And it's called Kaftrio. And this drug is a combination drug that not only is an antibiotic, but it's also an anti-inflammatory drug, and it counteracts the worst problems if you've got CF, particularly with the genetic combination that my boys have. So when it was released, which was about 5 years ago, my eldest son Sam actually lives in Australia now, and there it's called Trikafta. So Kaftrio, Trikafta. I thought, well, that kind of makes sense because they're down under. They're going to swap the words around, aren't they? You know,
course, just to be
that's what they're going to do.
Yeah.
Anyway, he eventually did get it as well on the Australian system, and it has literally changed Jonathan's life. If he walked in today, you would not know there was anything wrong with him.
Wow.
He was in a triathlon a couple of years ago. He does the park run every Saturday with his wife. He got a master's degree in engineering. He has a very good job as an engineer. He is a very healthy young man of 30, 31, 32.
Mm-hmm.
How old is Johnny? I can't remember what we 26. Yeah, 32 now. He's 32. And Sam will be 34 in June. And they just look entirely, Sam is 6 foot. Johnny's a little bit shorter because he had quite a lot of steroids when he was younger because of his chest. So it slightly stunted his growth. But he's still, I think 5'9", 5'10", although his brothers all make fun of him because they're all a bit older than him. They're all a bit taller than he is. But no, so really that was a very, very tough time. And of course I had to live with that. That's still present in my life. That's still part of my family. But the boys are great, and they're doing really, really great. I think the second moment I can think of is when I ran out of money. So I was in the middle of this 7-bed HMO development, which I had very, very badly planned and very badly executed. And I realised that was going to be £30,000 short. And I literally had 2 nights, sleepless nights, because I had convinced Andy that this is what we should be doing. I'd sold it to him. and he always says, you could sell ice to the Eskimos. And I thought, this is going to be this is going to be it. We're going to be financially free, babe. We're going to get there. It's going to be fantastic. And we're going to have some time. And of course, because of the boys' health needs, I really needed more time. I needed to be at home more and have more income and have more ability to be with them. And there I was. I'd misjudged the budget, and I realised, and the builder told me, because of these additions that we now needed because of building regs, it was going to be another £30,000. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? But that was the first time that I learned to raise money from somebody else. And I approached a few people, and I did a little spreadsheet, and I showed what I could pay them in interest. And one of my friends said, yes, I'll lend you the money. So although it was very bleak and very, very worrying, and I felt I'd let everybody down, and I was very worried that the project wouldn't ever be finished and I'd have to sell it. And, I thought, oh, this is terrible. Wendy, oh, what have you done? And I was really kicking myself. I did find from that kind of awful couple of nights sleep a bit of a creative spark, I suppose. And I thought, maybe if I do this could work. And it did work. And I raised the £30,000, and I managed to finish the project, and it's great. It's been a great HMO.
No, thank you for sharing that. I think it's because part of my hope in this podcast is it's the real hustle. So people's real stories, because so often financial freedom, it's thrown out there like, okay, get into property. It'll be smooth sailing. You'll be financially free on a beach in a year. And the reality is that all of us, I've had it before, you wake up in the middle of the night, like, oh my goodness, how are you going to we're going to make this work or whatever. And the mental strain that I think it puts on people's lives, marriages, friendships. And I've started working on a bunch of stuff, processing and wondering, okay, how do we, it's almost kind of like before people get married, doing pre-marriage counseling and saying, here's what to expect. Here's the reality, not just the course sell of how easy it's going to be, but the reality is this is going to test you, mentally and that. But you said you're a Christian. I'm also a Christian personally. Why are you a Christian?
Well, because I decided to follow Christ. Simple as that, really. When I was a child, I I was born and brought up in a Christian family, so I had that influence from when I was young. And when I was a young person, I used to go to summer camps as a child. And I remember once the leader of the camp just made an invitation. You know, if you want to become a Christian, you need to ask Jesus into your heart. And here's a prayer. And he said the prayer, and anyone who wants to do it, repeat the prayer after me. And I did, and that was it. I thought, I'm a Christian now. And my faith has definitely gone through ebbs and flows. I've probably about the time when I was doing all the property stuff, I felt I wasn't able to speak so much about my faith. I wasn't really very as open about my faith as I now look back and think I wish I had been. But I think also I've become more confident about speaking about my faith. I mean, I've been a Christian a long time, and sometimes I've been very vociferous and very passionate, and then other times less so. And sometimes that's aligned with periods where I've doubted, and I'm not sure if God is really there. I've doubted the church, or I've perhaps sometimes been in churches that I've been very unhappy with. And that's normal again, I think, as part of your Christian journey, is that you sometimes feel great as a Christian and other times you don't. And you wonder why you've followed this path. And you have doubts, and you question what the Bible says, or you question what other people say, or you disagree with them. But I think, maybe as I've got a bit older and I've become more certain about who I am, taken a long time, I know. I do feel more confident now to be able to discuss my faith, and I think also expose it as a kind of fundamental aspect of who I am and what my values are. And I've from many women are approaching retirement at my age. Many of my friends are thinking about when they're going to get their pension, and I am thinking about the next phase of my life. Basically, I don't really ever want to retire. I want to live till I'm over 100, so I've got at least 40 years left. And because I just think
70
I've got
years. Come on, what's
thank you. If only.
Yeah.
I think these lines give it away. I just feel I've got so much more to do, and I mean, yes, I probably am quite an energetic person. I have that benefit of being born, my poor parents, but being born as a bit of a bundle of energy, and that hasn't really ever dissipated, much to many people's horror. My husband just says, Wendy, please.
But I think it's incredible the energy that you bring, because since we've just met, you've just got this energy inside of you, and it's a question that I get asked often, and we mentioned it earlier, was people say, why don't you stop? They say, wasn't the point of getting into property to be able to relax and, have passive income, which is a whole myth in itself. We've just, we'll come to that another day. But why is it you don't stop? And what's driving that inner drive inside of you?
Well, yeah, we discussed this a little bit, didn't we, driving in today? I think that once a friend of mine once said to me, when will it be enough? When will you have enough? And I've thought a lot about that question, because I thought it was a very probing question that other people who are entrepreneurs must have been asked. People like Elon Musk. I'm sure people have said, oh, come on, Elon, you've got enough. When is it going to be enough? Just stop. The problem is the drive that you have within you, it becomes more than just material. It's not just about having more money anymore. You tap into something. When you're an entrepreneur, it's a bit like learning how to climb a mountain, for example. You say to yourself, there's a mountain over there. I would just like to climb it. I don't know why I want to climb it. I just want to climb it. I'm just kind of driven to climb it. I'm going to learn how to climb. And I'm not just talking about walking with walking boots, climbing, moving your feet. I'm talking about proper rock climbing. So you go on a couple of courses, you learn how to use the equipment, learn how to use the crampons, learn how to do what you need to do, get the right kit. And you start off and you think, right, yeah, I'm gonna climb this wall. And you get some way up and you look down and go, look, I'm actually doing it. This is great. And I think it's a little bit like that you learn how to use the equipment, you learn how to use your tools, you learn what you're good at. but the drive, you might climb Everest. I know that is walking, climbing, but the desire almost feeds and creates its own desire. So the desire to own more, the desire to control more, the desire to do more. But I think it changes. It evolves into being more, to influencing more, to sharing more, to helping more. You realize there's more you can do. And actually, money, this paper stuff we talked about earlier, is actually a very good tool for enabling a lot of that. So, for example, in about a month's time, just over a month's time, I'm flying out to Malawi. So I sponsor a project in Malawi, and I've been sponsoring them for about 5 years. And I am so excited because I'm going to go and see the school that I sponsor in Malawi.
First time going?
First time, absolutely.
Don't drink the water. That's all I can say.
Thank you.
One of my good friends has nearly died there.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
From drinking the water?
Well, it's something in the, obviously, I mean, it's one of the poorest, I think it's...
It is. It's
poorest,
the fourth poorest country in the world.
Yeah. But do a lot of mission work there with the veterinary group. So, yeah.
Amazing.
But no,
That's great.
Amazing.
So I'm going out there with a small group. There's about 4 of us going. And I'm really, really excited about that. I couldn't go on the trip if I didn't have residual income. If I just had earned income from my job, I wouldn't be able to afford it. Now, as well as that earned income, of course, I've been able to donate a lot to this charity as well. I also sponsor 7 children in Bolivia. That's through a charity called Compassion. And one of the reasons we went out to Bolivia a couple of years ago was to meet one of the children who'd graduated from the program, who I've carried on supporting, called Daniel. And we met him in person. And that was amazing because I've supported him since he was about 4 years of age. Well, I couldn't have done that. Bringing up my own 4 boys, that's expensive enough, let me tell you, particularly with school fees. That's very, very expensive. So if you want to do those things, you need to have the currency. You need to have the mechanism to do it. And money is what we use to do that. So for me, money is actually about enabling. It is itself an energy force. It is its own energy. So that's why there may not ever be a time when enough is enough, because I want to do more. I've got more desire to do more. And the things I suppose that I've got involved with, often just by chance, it really is. I mean, I know Steve Jobs said you can only connect the dots looking backwards. And I see that. I very much see that. But, when I met Darren Brewer and Alan Murdy, and it was great. I mean, those discussions we had, Darren's hilarious. He's a great property entrepreneur. You should get him on the podcast. He's brilliant. Love Darren to bits. But we would go off in all sorts of different tangents, and I think, where's this going? What are we doing? And, he was vital to the campaign. I really supported him. He really should have got all the awards, not me, because it was because of him that we really changed the law. But, how did I know I was ever going to meet Darren? How was I ever going to meet Alan? Well, we just didn't know. And I just thought, yeah, I'll help. I'll just get involved and I'll see what I can do and I can just help. And it grew and grew and grew. And it's carried on since there. So I think sometimes it's about just letting doors open. You don't have to push too hard sometimes. Something's there. Something's tapping away in your brain. And you've got to just say yes to it. I think Richard Branson says, his phrase is, if somebody presents you with an opportunity, say yes and figure out how afterwards.
That's so true.
Isn't it? His book is Screw It, Let's Do It. Yeah. And that says it all, doesn't it? Yeah. And Robert Kiyosaki as well, he says, don't ask whether you can afford it, ask how you can afford it. Again, just a little word, what a difference in the sentence. It has power, doesn't it, language? How can I afford it? Not whether I can afford it. So, yeah, I think for me, that's maybe part of it, is thinking, how can I do this? Not whether I can do it. How can I do it?
I love that. But that is the entrepreneurial drive inside of you, because when I talk to people like yourself, you instantly can relate because you understand it. You understand that drive, because we're trying to figure it out as well. Because I've asked the question often, like, when will enough be enough? My wife asked me that because initially, when we first got married, my thought was, we'll get to, at that point, I thought, okay, 10 houses will be enough, or 12 houses, whatever. And then you get to that point, and then you think, okay, so you make your new vision plan, push it to that thing, and then you're like, okay, now what? And when I had a bit of a meaning crisis, because what was I, 30, 31, and you're financially free, you don't ever have to work again in your life. Now what?
Yes.
And if it weren't for the church side and, impact and understanding that the true way, the secret to living is giving, and there's something about generosity and having money that can enable dreams and visions, not just for myself, but for other people, like a business partner now that I can invest in and say, that was always a dream inside of me, but you need money. And it makes me so excited when I hear people like yourself, where you're not slowing down, where you're saying, okay, well, because I break problems up into properties now. And I think, okay, if I have a call into politics, what do I need to financially to make this happen, that I'm self-sustained and I can have private security for all of my family, even if the government don't pay for it? Because you watch what's going on. I was like, I'm not, putting my family into the firing line with my girls so I've broken it into properties. I say, okay, this is what it will need. This is how it's going to happen. And it's incredible what you can do with that. Even now, we're trying to we want to get 100 kids out of trafficking, slavery, and into good homes, because that's the second part, is that, working towards it. But I want to ask you, because I'm just aware we could talk all day, by the way. We're definitely going to have a part 2. But I want to just go back into the political realm, where you're a Reform town councillor. So you belong to the Reform Party.
Yes.
Okay. Are you racist?
Oh, terribly racist. I don't know how I can speak to you if you've come from South Africa.
I mean, I'm an immigrant. Are you comfortable?
Exactly.
The reason I say that is because I've spoken to people who say, as soon as I hear reform, or that because now I'm in this dilemma, which I might come to, is they're like, oh, but they're racist. They just it's like that phrase that's thrown out, and Nigel's this or Nigel's that. What is your answer to that? And also, some people would say, aren't you a Christian? How can you be a capitalist supporting Reform Party? Shouldn't we just let people into the country? What are your thoughts?
It's a really good, it's important to have those debates, and it's important to make it visible and to explain. Being a Reform candidate, a Reform member, somebody who supports the Reform Party, it doesn't mean that because I believe that we should limit immigration, that I'm a racist. I've always believed that we should limit immigration, whether that's immigration from the EU, whether it's immigration from Africa, whether it's immigration from Australians, whether it's immigration from South Africa. So this immigration is not about where you come from. Some people will make it where you come from, and certainly integration might be where you come from, the culture you bring, the values you bring, the fact you don't speak English, which makes it much harder to integrate. But integration is a separate topic. Again, happy to discuss it. But immigration is really a numbers game. And the problem that we've seen over the last 20 years, in fact, is a much lower bar being set for people coming into the UK. And this has huge impacts on our economy and on our resources. We've seen the NHS really on its knees dealing with the numbers that are expected to access the NHS and the people that need healthcare. Education services are also stretched to the bare minimum, especially in certain areas where children don't speak English, and so translators are being provided. Interpreters are going into schools. Again, it's a lot of extra cost on the education system. Now, what I believe in is having a number. I really don't mind what race you are. And in fact, if anything, I think I do actually believe that a bit of a racial mix in any country is a good thing. We are as many people will say, our history is that we have been invaded more than once by people of different cultures and different nations, and they have integrated into our country, and we have learned from them. Some good, perhaps some not so good. But I think that that mix is actually what makes a modern dynamic society. I grew up in a place in North Kent called Gravesend, and there were lots of Sikh families there, lots of Indian families. And I had lots of friends who were Sikh girls. And I learned how to bake chapatis. I learned how to make Indian sweetbreads. I learned how to make Indian tea. I learned some Indian words to speak. And I felt very much like I learned about their background, their religious beliefs, their culture, and it was fascinating to me. And again, I could see some elements of their beliefs and their family, which I thought were brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And I think in many cultures around the world, that's why people like to travel, isn't it? We like to see how other people live. We're fascinated. I just came back from Oslo last week, and the Norwegians are very similar to us in some ways, but different in others. And it's just really interesting to see the way they deal with certain aspects of life. And for example, they're very outdoorsy people, even though it's a really cold country. We were there beginning of April and it was still like 3 degrees, but they're all running and skiing and, they're all very, very outdoorsy. And I thought, this is fantastic. Why aren't we like this in the UK? We have warmer weather, but we stay indoors more. So we like to travel because we like to find out about other people and because we're fascinated in how other people live. So for me, the question of immigration is, if we're going to allow 40,000 people to come into the country, they want to come in, they want to mix, they want to integrate, they want to contribute, this is a good thing for the country. But the problem is where you get 250, 300, 400,000 people per annum, it's simply not sustainable. We don't have the resources to deal with it. And not only that, but there are many of those people who are coming in who are not actually contributing. Now, the majority of people in the UK who don't contribute are British nationals. We shouldn't forget that. They're the ones who are actually getting the benefits. The 9 million people you mentioned earlier, about 70% of those are British nationals. They're not immigrants. So we have to deal with what's on our doorstep first. But as part of that problem, we've also got to look at the numbers that we are importing into the UK. There are, of course, some special classes. I think care workers, doctors, some of the health profession. We're not creating our own. We're not training our own people to do those jobs. So we have to have people from abroad. And again, it's interesting because they bring other skills, they bring other attributes, they bring other knowledge that we perhaps don't have. So if there is a well-run system that allows for reasonable numbers every year to come into the country, those people are contributing. They have visas that expire where they have to apply for them again, as Reform have said in terms of the indefinite leave to remain policy. I'm fully in favour of that. It's nothing about being racist at all. I don't care where you come from. If you meet those criteria, you're welcome. If you don't, I'm sorry, you're not. And that is not unreasonable. Countries across the world are exactly the same. Countries across, if you think about Australia, my son has emigrated to Australia. He's been there 6 years. A points-based system. Because he's got CF, he has an additional health need, and this is slowing down his visa application, but he's applying to be a resident there, full-term resident. And yet he's British, white, male, full-time worker, he's a chef. You'd think that they would welcome him with open arms. No, they're very picky about who they let in. I don't see why the UK should be any different from any of those other Western economies. We have to be careful with our economy. And for me, immigration is a key area that stops us from being productive as a nation. And so it is an area that we have to address. And I take my hat off to Nigel and Zia for being so focused on reform, on immigration for reform, because no other parliamentary party has taken such a strong, firm line and stood by it. And I think you have to be strong because you're fighting against a wave of positive multiculturalism. But we know that multiculturalism has not always done good things for this country. There are some good things that people from other countries bring and other cultures bring. But there's an awful lot that we have to be slightly wary about and careful about. And that's why I'm very pleased about the reform approach.
It's an interesting one because a few of my friends, we play poker on a Sunday, the odd Sunday, and we're at the table and we looked around. It was so funny because I just said, hey guys, what's your thoughts on immigration and which party would you vote for? Everyone who's a legal migrant is pro border control.
Yes.
Because we've come from countries.
Because you value it.
We value it. And also we've come from countries done it the right way, but also where we've seen illegal immigration and what it can do to a country like South Africa, where you've got 30%, 32% unemployment rate officially, a lot higher unofficially. And then you have 3-4 million people coming in from a neighboring country that's upset. What happens to that? You get an illegal economy, you get crime, you get, all these things. It's not just that, but there is that aspect to deal with. But
there are always trade-offs.
There are always trade-offs. But with the integration question, what do you see of the negatives of multiculturalism, and what is the solution to existing areas where there hasn't been integration?
I think the problem that we've had with multiculturalism, and I don't think this necessarily should have been a problem, but it has been, is that unfortunately we have also been led by politicians who believe the rhetoric that we cannot establish Britain's rule of law, constitution, court system on a fair basis. They think we have to positively discriminate towards those people who come to the UK who are not British. So in other words, if they don't speak perfect English, if they don't abide by our rules, we have to somehow, we have to embrace that. We have to accept it. We have to capitulate to it. That for me is a massive danger, because what it's saying is that we actually do have a two-tier system. That if you're born here and bred here, you have to abide by this set of rules. In fact, those are even harsher now. And if you're not, we're going to be very kind to you. We're going to be very soft and gentle on you. We're going to let way. And in fact, Matt Goodwin has written about this in his book, his recent book. I think is it called Death of a Nation? And he talks about it's a moral. I can't quite remember the phrase he uses, but it's a suicidal tendency or a moral suicide. It falls into the bucket of a moral panic. Effectively, the left wing have decided that because we have a strong belief in who we are as a nation, and we have a belief in who we are and what we're about, this cannot stand while we have we open our borders. And of course, when Tony Blair first started to reduce the immigration layers to enable people to come in, because he claimed that we needed more immigration because of the economy. We needed people to work in the sectors that British people wouldn't work in. And rather than tackle that problem, we said, right, we're going to have lower expectations for immigrants, so and we can increase the numbers of those coming in. But the problem is we have had to the state therefore has adapted and has changed. And of course, we've had pieces of legislation that have been brought in that have enabled that, like the Equalities Act, for example, the Human Rights Act. All of these have paved the way towards positive discrimination against those special interest groups, whether you are disabled, or you're an immigrant, or you're gay, or you're whatever. Everybody who's mentioned in the Equalities Act as requiring these special treatments, what we've done is, rather than say, well, we still believe in our British set of values, we still believe in this judicial system, we still believe in the rule of law, we've said, well, because you're this, because you're that, we're going to compromise, we're going to soften, we're going to weaken. And that's what's happened. And so therefore, rather than saying, well, hang on a minute, I mean, I saw a TikTok video a few weeks ago of a street in Birmingham where the cars are parked double, and an ambulance couldn't get through on this road because not only is it's not just single parking where the cars are, it's double parking. But because this is a stronghold of, well, I don't know what it might be a Muslim area. Certainly, I would say the families living there, they were not British, probably immigrants. And again, this was just came across in a TikTok video, so please don't shout down at me. But this is what I saw. The ambulance couldn't get through, and the police were too scared to address it with the people who were double parked on the road. Now, this is what we've seen, of course, with the grooming gangs. We've seen this with the rape gangs across the UK, where police, because of the Equalities Act, have said, we have to give them special treatment. We can't treat them the same as a British-born individual. So we have to treat them with kid gloves. And unfortunately, this has allowed our country to become, to have some awful, terrible things happen to those girls that have been trafficked, they have been raped. It has been absolutely abhorrent what has happened in communities across the UK. But the left are not willing to tackle it. They're not willing to be unpopular. They're not willing to stand up and say, hold on a minute, enough is enough. But a lot of what I do and say in politics is based on being a mum. I'm a mum of 4 boys. If we had a child come into our house and they started to behave in a way which, you know, broke our family rules, maybe they were swearing or throwing things across the kitchen or something, I wouldn't just say, oh, dear old Tommy, it's because he's had a difficult upbringing or he's had a difficult life. There would be an element in which, yes, I would be sympathetic, I'd be compassionate towards that little boy, but I would say, Tommy, in this house, we don't swear, we don't throw things across the kitchen. Put it down, sit down and eat your tea. And I feel that we've lost that kind of strength to be that nation. And, you know, other nations are very happy to be like that. If you were to go and live in a different culture, in a different nation, let's say perhaps a nation, maybe an Arab nation. Dubai. Exactly. We have to abide by their laws. Correct. Yeah. You know, I don't think they allow you to hold hands on the street. You certainly couldn't kiss openly without having severe penalties. And people abide by it because they respect it, because Dubai sets it out and says, if you're going to live here, this is how we expect you to live. And consequently, they have very, very low crime and they have very few social problems. They have other problems as well. There are still trade-offs, but that's the way they've decided to be. And I just think that the UK has lost that and we've given it away piece by piece and we need to regain it. And actually, when you are strong, a bit again like a mother who's strong and firm, do you know what? Little Tommy thinks, I like coming here because you've got boundaries. You say no and you mean no. And actually, love sometimes is tough. And we haven't given tough love to the residents, to the citizens of the UK. So actually, sometimes you need tough love. And I think law and order is critical for a safe, secure society. And as we know, the management of the realm, the sovereignty of the realm is a key component of what government should do, the safety and security of the realm. And we have lost that over the last 20 years. And we need to re-establish it. It's absolutely vital for the security of the people who live here and for the security of the people who are going to live here.
I mean, I couldn't agree more in terms of we need authority back in society because it's been deconstructed completely to the point of the nuclear family has been destroyed. So parents aren't willing to be parents anymore and say no and, you know, put boundaries in place. And I think that it's super encouraging to hear your optimism in terms of fighting for this nation, because I'm getting in the ring at some point. I'll be explaining, you know, to people what I'm going to do, but I need to help. I don't care what, you know, I've got an idea of what I want to do, but there's just this pure passion that Britain was made to be a leading nation. And since I've been here, I've seen such a shift happen. I've only been here just over 10 years. And I just thought, why? When I first moved, British people were afraid to be British. It was like they had to apologize for their history constantly. I'm like, hang on a sec, like, what are we doing? Like, be proud of your nation. You guys are incredible. You know, you've built so many inventions, the unicorns that have been made, the billion-dollar companies founded in London. It's incredible what the British people can do. And war. Look at, when Britain needs to stand,
the Industrial
they stand.
Revolution.
Industrial
If
Revolution.
you look at the Industrial Revolution, the steam engine, Robert Louis Stevenson, Christopher Wren, a fantastic architect of the 17th century. You're absolutely right. We have created and produced so many incredible people who have changed the world. And, without the Industrial Revolution, there are many things in this room we wouldn't have. They wouldn't have been invented. And therefore, yes, you're absolutely right. And of course, some of this comes down to energy, which we haven't even touched on today. Perhaps my personal energy, but not you can't really monetize that, not yet anyway. And I think that you're right. We've lost that sense of pride, but not pride in the sense that we want to lord it over people, but more that you can do this too. We're a small country. Our landmass is very small comparatively, but it's about having the right attitude, the right education. Education has always been very core to the British way of life. We passed the 1870 Education Act in 1870 to enable children from different backgrounds to access education on a universal level for the first time. Many countries, it wasn't until the 20th century when that happened. So we have always believed in hard work and education. These are Christian values that have underpinned our country for 2,000 years. And I think we destroy it at our peril. And therefore, it's so important that we do return to those values. But I would like not just to see us returning to those values, I would like us to envisage a new future as well, where, yes, we become the innovation center of the world, where no longer do we leave it to America and India and China and other big countries to do this. We start to think about how can we develop AI that really impacts the rest of the world? What is it the rest of the world is looking for that we can also be at the center and front of? And I think there are an awful lot of opportunities out there. And I think that's one thing that Brits are very good at seeing. Why is it that the founders of America, many of them were British people who sailed across the Atlantic to settle and make a new life there? They were the founders of a new world. And it's that mindset that we have probably within our genes and we'll never remove, but we need to now shine a light on it and really make it grow and make it happen.
Wendy, I could keep talking to you. I just want to say thank you so much for coming on. I'd still like to discuss restore, reform.
Yes.
That could be part 2.
Fine.
We might break this up into 2 parts anyway, but I'm optimistic when I talk to you. Because they're people like yourself that I am so excited to hear more from. And you've got the gift of speaking as well. So I really encourage you to go for it. And, if you were to run this country as well, I'd be very encouraged by it. So, and if we get a debate, I'd love to get you down for that with some opposition, parties and that kind of thing, because I really want to get people talking. And I think you've got that gift, and I'm really encouraged by this discussion, and just go for it.
It's been great to be on the podcast. I really appreciate you inviting me.
A pleasure.